You're a German soldier on the Eastern Front. It's midnight. The cold seeps into your bones, a deeper chill than the Russian winter. The sky is empty, silent. There's no drone of an engine, no warning. Then the world erupts. An explosion tears through your supply depot. Then another hits the fuel dump. You look up, desperately searching for the source, and hear only a soft, ghostly whoosh, like the rustling of a broomstick through the air. Your comrades are screaming a name, a curse, a legend. Nachthexen, the Night Witches. They weren't ghosts, they were something Hitler never saw coming, and they were flying planes made of nothing more than plywood and canvas. This story doesn't start on the battlefield. It starts with a flood of letters, thousands of them, from young women all across the Soviet Union. As the Wehrmacht sliced deeper into their homeland in 1941, these women, students, factory workers, farmhands, felt a burning need to do more. They could drive tractors, they could build tanks, so why couldn't they fly them? They wrote to one person, a woman who was a national hero, the Soviet Amelia Earhart, Marina Raskova. She was a record-setting aviator, a navigator, and one of the few women with Stalin's ear. The letters all said the same thing: "We want to fight. Let us fly." The military establishment laughed. Aviation was a man's world. War was a man's business. But Raskova saw something they didn't, a vast, untapped resource of patriotism and raw courage. She took their pleas, their passion, and she walked straight into the Kremlin. To understand the sheer audacity of what happened next, you have to understand their weapon. It wasn't a state-of-the-art fighter. It wasn't a high-altitude bomber. It was the Polikarpov P-02, a plane so obsolete it was almost an insult. Imagine a crop duster from the 1920s being sent to fight in World War II. That's what this was. Made of a wooden frame and canvas skin, its top speed was a pathetic 94 miles per hour. A modern car could outrun it. German fighters flew so fast they had trouble slowing down enough to even get a shot off. The plane had no armor to protect the crew, no radio for communication, no parachutes, because the planes were considered less valuable than the parachutes themselves. It was a flying coffin. But this fragile, forgotten little plane had a few strange tricks up its sleeve. It was incredibly maneuverable, able to make tight turns that faster planes couldn't. Its maximum speed was lower than the stall speed of the German fighters, making it a frustratingly difficult target. And most importantly, it could fly so low and so slow that it was almost impossible to detect by radar. This flying relic, this sewing machine as the pilots called it, would become the perfect tool for a ghost. Stalin gave Raskova the go-ahead. 3 all-female air regiments would be formed. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was one of them. Women flocked to the Engels Military Aviation School from every corner of the Union. They were mostly volunteers, aged 17 to 26. They were given men's uniforms that didn't fit, boots that were too big, and haircuts that were brutally short. Their training was compressed into a few frantic months. What should have taken years, they had to learn in a season. They became pilots, navigators, mechanics, and armorers. They learned to fly in the brutal Russian winter, in open cockpits where frostbite was a constant enemy. They studied navigation by stars and stopwatches, memorizing maps until they could see them in their sleep. The male instructors were often dismissive, giving them the worst equipment and the most grueling schedules. The women didn't just have to fight the Germans, they had to fight for the right to be there in the first place. Every day was a test, not just of skill, but of will. They were told they were inferior. They were told they would fail. And every single day they set out to prove them all wrong. Their plane was a weakness, so they made it a strength. Their missions were exclusively at night, under the cloak of total darkness. Standard bombing runs were noisy, giving the enemy time to prepare their anti-aircraft guns. The women of the 588th developed a terrifyingly brilliant tactic. They would fly in formations of 3. 2 planes would approach the target and act as decoys, drawing the attention of the searchlights and ground fire. The 3rd plane, the strike plane, would cut its engine completely about a kilometer from the target. The Po-2's engine made a distinct popping sound, earning it the nickname the sewing machine. But when that sound vanished, there was only silence. The pilot would glide the plane through the darkness, a silent shadow moving through the sky. This was the source of that eerie, whooshing sound the Germans heard. It was the wind whistling through the plane's bracing wires. Over the target, the navigator, often leaning out of the cockpit, would drop the bombs by hand. Then, the pilot would restart the engine and climb away, the decoys closing in to cover their escape. This tactic was incredibly dangerous. Stalling the engine at low altitude was a death sentence. But it was also devastatingly effective, both physically and psychologically. In June 1942, they were finally sent to the front. Their commander was a woman named Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the only woman to ever command a male or female air regiment in the Soviet Air Force. Their first missions were harassment bombings. They didn't target massive infrastructure, they targeted morale. They would fly over German encampments night after night, dropping small bombs that prevented soldiers from sleeping. They destroyed supply caches, fuel depots, and command posts. The attacks were relentless. A single crew might fly 8 or more missions in one night, landing only to refuel and rearm before taking off again into the darkness. The Germans on the ground were driven to the brink of madness. They couldn't see them, they could barely hear them, but the destruction was real. They started calling them Nachthexen, night witches. It was meant to be an insult, a way to dehumanize these unseen enemies. But the women of the 548th heard the name and wore it as a badge of honor. It meant they were feared. It meant their work was paying off. Their courage came at a terrible cost. Remember, they flew without parachutes. If their plane was hit, there was no escape. The PO-2 was incredibly flammable. One tracer round hitting the canvas skin could turn the entire aircraft into an inferno in seconds. They faced a constant barrage of anti-aircraft fire, or flak. They learned to read the different colors of the explosions to know what kind of shells were being fired at them. They also had to contend with German night fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-110. Against these predators, their only defense was to dive towards the ground and use their incredible maneuverability to weave through trees and hedgerows where the faster German planes couldn't follow. Every mission was a gamble. 32 pilots from the regiment would not survive the war. They lost their friends, their sisters in arms. After a crash, the other women would pull the bodies from the wreckage, patch up the planes themselves, and fly again that very same night, sometimes in the same aircraft their friends had just died in. Grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. One pilot embodied the spirit of the night witches more than any other, Nadezhda Nadia Popova. She was a force of nature, flying an incredible 852 combat missions. She was shot down multiple times and always found her way back. In one famous incident, her plane was shredded by flak. She managed to nurse the crippled aircraft back towards Soviet lines, but had to make a crash landing in a field. She and her navigator survived, but were stranded in no man's land. As they began the dangerous journey back on foot, they stumbled upon another downed Soviet pilot, a wounded fighter pilot lying near his wrecked plane. Together, the 3 of them made their way back to friendly territory. The fighter pilot's name was Semyon Harlamov. Nadia and Semyon would fall in love and marry after the war, staying together for 45 years. Nadia's plane, upon inspection, was riddled with holes.
"Nadia," her mechanic said, "you were born in a lucky shirt." Her story was one of many, a testament to the blend of skill, luck, and sheer stubbornness that kept these women alive.
Life between missions was as harsh as the combat itself. They lived in mud huts, tents, or requisitioned buildings right behind the front lines. They were constantly on the move, following the shifting tides of the war. Their existence was stripped down to the bare essentials. They faced the same shortages, the same cold, and the same poor rations as any frontline soldier. But they created a world for themselves. The regiment was a true sisterhood. They supported each other, mourned together, and celebrated their small victories. They were creative and resourceful. Lacking proper navigation tools, they used pencils and rulers. With no radar, they relied on maps, compasses, and stopwatches. They even decorated their drab planes with flowers and drew cartoons on the side of their bombs. These small acts of defiance, of humanity, were their way of holding on to themselves in the midst of the chaos. They weren't just soldiers. They were young women, full of life, caught in the most brutal conflict in human history.
As the war turned in the Soviet Union's favor, the Night Witches played a crucial role in major offensives. During the battle for the Taman Peninsula and the liberation of Crimea in 1943 and 1944, their harassment tactics were honed to a razor's edge. The German and Romanian forces holding the peninsula were well entrenched. The 588th was tasked with making their lives impossible. Night after night, the sewing machines buzzed over the lines, bombing defensive positions, supply lines, and ferry crossings. Their psychological impact was immense. One German report from the time noted that the constant, unpredictable bombing raids were a major factor in the erosion of troop morale. The witches became so effective and so feared that the regiment was officially given the honorific title 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. They were no longer just the 588th, they were guards, the elite of the Soviet military. The name given to them as an insult by their enemies was now overshadowed by a title of honor from their own commanders.
The Germans were not just frustrated, they were furious. How could they be tormented by women flying ancient biplanes? It was a deep insult to their perceived technological and military superiority. They dedicated specific night fighter squadrons to hunt the Night Witches. One German ace, Hauptmann Rudolf Sigmund, was tasked with bringing them down. But it was incredibly difficult. The PO2s were too slow, too low, and made of materials that barely registered on radar. They were ghosts in the machine. The German High Command eventually placed a bounty on them. Any German pilot who could shoot down a Night Witch was automatically awarded the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. This shows just how much of a nuisance, how much of a threat this small regiment of women had become. They were tying up valuable resources and sowing chaos far beyond what their numbers or their equipment should have allowed. We often focus on the pilots, but the two-person crew of a Po-2 was a partnership of absolute trust. The navigator, sitting in the front cockpit, had an arguably more stressful job. In complete darkness, with no electronic aids, she was responsible for guiding the pilot to a precise point on the ground. A small error could mean missing the target, or worse, flying into a concentration of anti-aircraft guns. Once over the target, it was her job to release the bombs. The Po-2 had no internal bomb bay. The bombs, usually 2 at a time, were carried on racks under the wings. She would pull a lever to release them, often having to lean out of the cockpit to ensure they had dropped correctly. She was also the primary defender. While the Po-2 was usually unarmed, some were later fitted with a machine gun for the navigator.
But in the dark, in a slow-moving plane, hitting anything was nearly impossible. Her real job was to be the pilot's second pair of eyes, scanning the darkness for searchlights, for enemy fighters, for the telltale flashes of flak, and guiding them home. As the Red Army pushed the Germans out of the Soviet Union and back across Eastern Europe, the Night Witches went with them. They fought over Belarus, Poland, and finally into Germany itself. The nature of their missions changed. It was no longer just about harassing a sleeping army. They were now a vital part of a massive, grinding offensive. They provided close air support for advancing troops, bombing German strongpoints just ahead of the Soviet infantry. They targeted railways and bridges, disrupting the German retreat. They flew reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on enemy movements. The young women who had signed up to defend their motherland were now taking the fight directly to the enemy's home. They flew over a landscape scarred by years of war, witnessing the devastation firsthand. The end was in sight, but the fighting was more desperate and brutal than ever. On May 4th, 1945, just days before the official surrender of Germany, the Night Witches flew their final combat mission. Their target was inside the smoldering ruins of Berlin. For 3 years, they had flown through the darkest nights in the worst weather against impossible odds. They had started as a joke, an experiment. They ended as one of the most decorated units in the Soviet Air Force. By the end of the war, the regiment had flown over 24,000 combat sorties. They had dropped 3,000 tons of bombs. Every single surviving pilot had flown over 800 missions. 23 of them were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. They had flown from the foothills of the Caucasus all the way to the heart of the Third Reich. Their final flight wasn't just the end of a mission, it was the end of an era. When the war ended, there was a massive victory parade in Moscow's Red Square. The best soldiers, the biggest tanks, and the fastest, most powerful aircraft of the Soviet Union took part in a grand display. The Night Witches were not invited. Their planes, the humble Pa-2s, were deemed too slow and insignificant to be part of the grand flyover. It was a bitter, final insult. After proving themselves time and time again, after earning the respect of their enemies and the highest honors from their country, they were once again sidelined. Just 6 months after the end of the war, the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment was unceremoniously disbanded. The women were sent home. Their war was over. For many years, their story was largely forgotten, a footnote in the epic history of the Eastern Front. In the Soviet Union, the official narrative preferred to focus on the male heroes of the war, but the legend of the Nachthexen refused to die. The women themselves held reunions, keeping the memory of their fallen comrades alive. Slowly, historians and storytellers began to rediscover their incredible tale. They weren't just pilots, they were pioneers. They shattered one of the highest glass ceilings in the world, proving that women could be elite combat aviators. They fought 2 wars, one against the fascists and another against the prejudice that said they didn't belong. Their legacy lives on in every woman who dons a flight suit, in every girl who dreams of touching the sky. They were a nightmare to their enemies, but they should be an inspiration to us all. Let's take a moment to absorb the sheer scale of their achievement. This wasn't a small token unit. This was a relentless, highly effective fighting force. Over 3 years, a group that never numbered more than about 42-person crews flew more than 24,000 combat missions. That's an average of 600 missions per crew. Some, like Nadia Popova, flew far more. They dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary shells. Their attacks are credited with destroying or damaging 17 river crossings, 9 railway trains,
2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored cars, 86 enemy firing points, and 11 searchlights. They also performed 155 supply drops of food and ammunition to Soviet forces. They did all of this in an aircraft that was obsolete before the war even began. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and consistently underestimated. And they consistently won.
A regiment like this doesn't succeed without exceptional leadership. Yevdokia Bershanskaya was a pilot with 10 years of experience before the war. She was chosen by Marina Raskova to lead the 588th, and it was a masterful choice. She was a strict disciplinarian, demanding absolute perfection from her crews because she knew that a tiny mistake in the dark sky meant death. But she was also fiercely protective of her girls, as she called them. She fought bureaucratic battles for better food, better equipment, and the respect her pilots deserved. She understood the unique pressures they were under, not just from the enemy, but from their own side. It was her steady hand, her refusal to accept anything less than excellence that molded this group of young volunteers into an elite Guards regiment. She never flew combat missions herself as commander, a fact that pained her, but her war was fought on the ground, ensuring her pilots could win theirs in the air.
For every plane in the air, there was a team of unsung heroes on the ground. The mechanics and armorers of the 588th were also all women. Their work was punishing. The Po-2 required constant maintenance. After every flight, they had to refuel the plane, reload the bombs, service the engine, and patch up any damage from flak or bullets. They worked in open fields, in rain, snow, and freezing mud, often with no light but a shielded lantern or a truck's headlamps. They had to be incredibly resourceful, sometimes using scraps of material to patch holes in the canvas skin. The bond between the air crew and ground crew was absolute. A pilot and navigator trusted their lives to the young woman who had just serviced their engine. The ground crew, in turn, would wait anxiously on the airfield, counting the planes as they returned, their hearts sinking every time one was late or didn't come back at all. They were the backbone of the regiment.
It's easy to see them just as soldiers, as the witches of legend, but they were also poets, artists, students, and dreamers. One of the navigators, Rufina Gasheva, was known for her beautiful singing voice. Another pilot, Yevgenia Rudneva, was a brilliant astronomy student at Moscow State University before the war. She used her knowledge of the stars to become a master navigator. She was killed in action in 1944. They wrote poetry about the sky, about their friends, about their hopes for a future without war. These were not hardened killers. They were ordinary young women who rose to an extraordinary challenge. They found ways to maintain their identity and their humanity in the most dehumanizing of environments. They proved that courage and femininity were not mutually exclusive.
While the Night Witches are the most famous, we have to remember they were not alone. Marina Raskova's project created 3 female air regiments. The 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment flew modern Yak-1 fighters. They were tasked with air defense, protecting cities and railways from German bombers. 2 of its pilots, Lydia Litviak and Yekaterina Budanova, became the world's only female fighter aces. The 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, later renamed the 125th Guards, flew the advanced Petyakov P-2 twin-engine dive bomber. This was a complex, powerful aircraft, and they flew dangerous daylight missions. Marina Raskova herself commanded this regiment until her death in a flying accident in 1943. While the Night Witches' story is unique because of their obsolete planes and nighttime tactics, they were part of a larger, groundbreaking movement of Soviet women who took to the skies to defend their country.
Nachthexen. The Germans gave it to them out of a combination of fear and contempt. The witch moniker was likely inspired by the quiet, broomstick-like sound of their gliding planes.
but it was also a way to belittle them. In German folklore, witches were female, chaotic, and unnatural. By calling them witches, the German soldiers were trying to frame them as something outside the normal order of warfare, something freakish. But what the Germans meant as an insult, the Soviets and history took as a compliment. The name perfectly captured their mystique, their stealth, and their deadly effectiveness. It transformed them from mere soldiers into a legend, a supernatural force that owned the night. They embraced it fully because they knew that the fear their name inspired was one of their most powerful weapons.
After the war, many of the women found civilian life difficult. They were heroes, but they were also women who had done a man's job. Some were met with suspicion. Why weren't they married? Why had they spent years surrounded by soldiers? Their incredible achievements were often downplayed. As the Soviet Union rebuilt itself, it promoted a more traditional image of womanhood: the mother, the worker, the nurturer. The image of the female combat pilot didn't quite fit. Many of the women didn't speak about their experiences for decades. Their stories were private treasures, shared only with each other at their annual reunions. It took a new generation of historians, many of them women, to bring their story out of the shadows and give them the public recognition they had earned so long ago. The story of the Night Witches is more than just a war story. It's a story about defying expectations. It's about turning weakness into strength. It's about a sisterhood forged in fire and ice. They were given the worst plane, the most dangerous missions, and the least respect. In return, they gave their country their skill, their courage, and for 32 of them, their lives. They became a legend that haunted the dreams of an army and inspired generations to come. So the next time you look up at a dark, quiet night sky, listen closely. You might just hear the faint, ghostly whisper of the wind through the wires of a wooden biplane, an echo of the women who flew them, the women who became Hitler's worst nightmare. What part of their story do you find the most incredible? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more forgotten stories from history, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.